Hello and welcome to the Everyday Adventure Podcast. My name is Nikki Bass and I will be bringing you thoughts, ideas and stories from some incredible guests to hopefully inspire you to live more adventurously in your everyday lives. So this week, I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome Ash Alexander Cooper to the show. Ash is an old friend and a former colleague, and he's also one of these people that when you ask them to send through their bio and you start reading it all, and then you think, there is no way I can possibly do him justice in trying to summarize all the stuff he's done. So I'm going to give you a little snippet, but Ash is a veteran. He's a mental health campaigner. He's a speaker, motivational speaker on topics from resilience, leadership and performance. And he's also an internationally recognized musician and athlete. And I've wanted to speak to Ash for this podcast literally since I came up with the idea. And that's partly because he's always doing something really interesting, but mainly because I feel he really lives this ethos of living an adventurous life in the everyday. He's always looking, whether it's finding ways to get out with his daughter and do, really amazing adventures with her, whether it is just on his runs when he checks in, on his Instagram with the moments when he's gone out and there's a beautiful sunset, whatever. And it's like, to me, he is a real inspiration of how to really integrate that sort of adventurous way of living into your life. But then the perfect opportunity to speak to Ash came up when last month he was quarantined in Australia and waiting to see his daughter for the first time in 12 months. And he decided to run a marathon in his hotel room. And some of you may have seen the videos or the pictures of this. And this hotel room was pretty tiny. And I'll make sure I share some photos about this as well, because when you see the scale, it's actually incredibly impressive just to find the motivation to do that. And to me, it just felt like the perfect way to sum up this season of the podcast, because it is absolutely how you create an everyday adventure with literally the space you have around you. He did it to raise money for the Royal British Legion Industries. And I don't know the exact total, but I think it's certainly over £7,000 at this point. And I'm sure Ash will sort of give more detail on that. It's such an absolute pleasure to welcome you to the show, Ash. Thank you so much for agreeing to chat to me.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. And I don't think I really deserve that very kind intro, but thank you anyway.
The first question I absolutely have to ask is, what was it that motivated you to run, I won't even say around your hotel room, back and forward in your hotel room for a marathon plus halfway into your quarantine?
Well, with a daughter who lives in Australia, this isn't the first time that I've had to do quarantine. I did it a year ago in Sydney. And I was in quite a small hotel room then, and it was all quite new. And I hadn't really planned well enough about how I was going to stay fit or motivated or just not be overwhelmed or depressed by the situation of being literally locked in a room for 2 weeks. You're not allowed out for exercise, for daylight. You couldn't open your windows. There's no balcony. So it was quite an oppressive thing to deal with. And I did a couple of online exercise classes, and after about a week realized that you could augment the pretty atrocious food with a grocery delivery from the local kind of Tesco's equivalent. So when I was due to go back this year and managed to get all the authorizations, which took a lot of work as well to get various government exemptions to even enter the country, I thought I'd try and do something a bit more deliberate and constructive, because I recognize how difficult this past period has been for everybody because of COVID, being locked away in their houses or their flats or whatever. But also more broadly, beyond COVID, a lot of people do suffer from the feeling of being isolated and lonely. And when I arrived and realized that my room was slightly bigger, and although I still couldn't open the windows or get fresh air or anything else, I thought, well, how can I try and turn what could be quite a negative experience for some or for many into something a bit more positive, and use the opportunity to highlight some of those things that the RBLI, the charity, had been doing in terms of supporting veterans during lockdown, particularly many of whom had highlighted that the lockdown had been a real trigger for increased anxiety and loneliness and feelings of isolation. So I thought I'd just do a run. I hadn't decided it was going to be a marathon at the early idea stage, but after doing a couple of runs for an hour or so each, I figured that all I had to do was just keep putting one foot in front of the other. And if I could make it more interesting to those who might seek to support the event, then a marathon would be a good thing to do. But as you know, it ended up going a little bit longer than that in the end. And I can explain more about that in a second if you're interested.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, please share. I mean, how did you, because I know you sort of considered stopping, or the plan was to stop at the marathon mark. So why did you continue?
Well, I had originally a fairly modest, I suppose, fundraising target of about £3,000. And I had planned to run a full marathon and was going to measure the distance with my, Garmin watch and my chest strap, which knows my stride length and everything else. And the room is about 30 feet across. So I figured I could take about 8 paces before I had to turn around. So it'd be quite a lot of laps, well over 4,500 laps to do it, to do the full marathon. And then as I was approaching the marathon point, I was just shy of £3,000 for my target. So I perhaps stupidly said, if people keep donating, I'll keep running. So I ended up running, I think what is technically an ultra marathon. It was only 52 kilometers, but it was about 6 miles over the full marathon distance, and managed to smash through the £3,000 mark. And then amazingly, money kept on coming. And as you alluded to in the title, we're now, or in the opening, we're now at about £7,600, and I've upped the target to 10,000, which I think is achievable, because it was a 2-phase fundraising event, really, the ultra marathon in the hotel, and then I have a half marathon for RBLI, the London Landmarks half marathon, in about 3 weeks' time. So that'll be a second sort of event where I hope to manage to just get us over the £10,000 mark.
Wow. I mean, there's the sheer physical challenge of, I guess, just running 8 paces or 8 steps and having to turn around and run back again. But I can imagine that there were probably a few psychological challenges you faced sort of doing that, and over, on your, like you said, on your own in a hotel room for that period of time. I know when I speak to people who do marathons, whether it's their first time or they do them regularly, and half of the reason that you feel that you make it round is because of the support of the crowds, or just concentrating on what's going, what you're running past, the landmarks or anything like that. So I guess, what were the biggest challenges you faced in doing it?
Yeah, there certainly wasn't an interesting route to be able to look at as you were going. And it made it quite sort of disconcerting in a way that I felt quite quickly you go into a bit of a trance, because you're constantly turning, and it's quite easy to get a little bit, wouldn't say necessarily disorientated, but you can lose your balance because your brain is not really focusing when you're just flashing backwards and forwards the whole time. So that was a bit of a challenge, but I managed to distract myself, really. That was the trick for me, was to keep my mind busy without therefore really thinking about the running. And as long as I just kept going, I wasn't going to set any records. And I've only ever run a marathon, a real sort of running marathon once, and that was in 1995. So it's been a while. And I didn't train for that one either, stupidly, because I figured I was very fit for rowing at the time. And I figured, well, I'm a fit rower, therefore running will be fine, and realized that you actually have to run if you want to get good at running. So that was quite a painful marathon in itself. And I learned clearly no lessons whatsoever, because apart from the 2 1-hour runs I did a week before this marathon, I hadn't really run much for many years because I'd been injured and what have you. So the way I distracted myself for this event was to listen to a bunch of podcasts, and it was global news and current affairs, and there are a few, Radio 4 comedy shows and stuff. But basically I filled the entire time with podcasts, which for me is what I do anyway when I run. And the reason I do that not only is because I like to keep up with what's going on around the world, but I love music. I have a musical background, as you mentioned, but in my brain, I know that most songs are about 3 minutes. And so hearing songs change, or if they're not changing, you think, God, this song's gone on, and then realizing that it still is, only a couple of minutes since the last one. That to me was probably more, off-putting, to know that you're not making as much progress as you hope. So I figured just keep running backwards and forwards, keep listening to podcasts, and I'd save them up during the week so I wasn't going to run out. And I also listened to them on 1.5 speed, which I know you might think is a bit weird, but there's so much I like to listen to, and I don't feel I've ever got enough time. So I generally listen to all my podcasts at least 1.5 speed so I can get through them. Otherwise, I hate sort of having them stacking up in my podcast inbox, as it were.
That's such a good
I know. I'm not normal. I know that. I'm not normal.
I was just thinking, I think we talked about this before. When I did my one and only marathon, I thought, I'll create a music playlist and that'll be fine. But I only think I went up to like 25 minutes worth of songs. And I remember just listening to The Killers on loop for what ended up being about 5 hours. And I can't say it was very motivating by the end. So I love that idea of actually, thinking and like you said, actually just to think of it as the time you get to listen to something or to dedicate to that, where you wouldn't normally, I think is a really interesting perspective on it as well.
Yeah, the other thing for this one was that I didn't start till 7 in the evening. It was supposed to be 6 p.m., but Sky News wanted to interview. And I was obviously at the beck and call of their scheduling, and the 8 o'clock interview then became a 9 o'clock interview live on Sky News in the morning here in the UK. So I ended up running through to about 1 in the morning. So I was quite tired by the end. But the other challenge was being in hotel lockdown, where you don't generally get to choose your food at all. Although the hotel very kindly, Radisson Blu in Sydney, very, very kindly did give me a pasta lunch, because I emailed the kind of the marketing team and said, look, I'll give you a shout out. Please, can you send me some food that's a bit better than what you normally share? And so they brought me some Powerade and some bananas and a pasta lunch. So I had a little bit of more kind of athletes type food. And a friend of a friend who runs a gym in Sydney very kindly sent me some energy powder as well as some tape, because I'd gone over on my ankle on the Friday. And it was really worrying me that the ankle would not survive all those turns, and that could have sort of ended the journey quite early on. So I'd strapped myself up pretty tightly before I started, and hoped that would keep me going, and thankfully it did. But it was quite a lot of pressure on the knees and ankles, and I was shot in my knee when I was serving, and I've always had a bit of a weak knee as a result, so I was worried about that as well. But thankfully everything held up as much as it needed to.
Brilliant. I can just imagine them receiving that email as well, thinking it's probably the only ever time they've had someone doing a marathon in their hotel room.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people said, what about the people above or below you? But the floors are very thick, so I don't think I made any noise. But definitely by the end, I did have to sort of scrape up the loose carpet that I'd taken the sort of top layer of carpet off where I was turning, and I was worried that they would charge me for the carpet. So I had to kind of gather all the dust a little bit, like you get in your vacuum cleaner, and then I put it in a bag and took it with me, rather than leaving it for the cleaners to go, what the hell's going on in here?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. So, I mean, there've been the obvious benefits of doing this in terms of, as you talked about, the the fundraising and what it's raised for charity, and I would imagine just providing with that focus for that, for what's potentially quite an isolating and difficult time in quarantine. I mean, have there been any other benefits that you experienced, or sort of unexpected benefits that have come about as a result of what you've done?
Well, it's connected me with a whole bunch of people that I didn't know before, through social media, who've reached out to say how much what I was highlighting had been helpful for them. And it's given me an opportunity through some of my speaking as well to highlight, not specifically related to the marathon, but more broadly about when one finds, you're in a situation that is difficult or challenging, where you don't own or can't control many of the things around you, to kind of think about what it is that you need to do for yourself to make sure that you can cope and get through that particular challenge. You mentioned resilience, talking about resilience specifically, I think it's very much about our ability as humans to adapt and learn in the face of adversity or something challenging. And as long as we can learn and adapt, then we'll be stronger the next time something, not necessarily the same thing, but something else happens that we have to rely on our sort of reserves of experience and knowledge. And so for me, it was just another, not event, but a period where I had to kind of refocus on, okay, what is it that I need to do? Maintain a routine. That's really important. I mean, although I never left the confines of this small room, every day when I got up at, my alarm would go off at the normal time, I'd make the bed, so that was done, sort of making these transitions between different phases of the day, and say, right, I'm going to do work emails for the first 2 hours of the day, then lunch will come, then I'll do some exercise, then I'll, allow myself some reading or watch a movie or something. And trying to keep a little bit of a routine was really, really important. The structure was built in some sense, because the meals would arrive within the same windows every day. But trying to make sure that you slept properly. I think it's very easy, chatting to other people who've done these kinds of quarantines, they said, they stayed up really late watching box sets and binging on things. And that actually doesn't necessarily help you, because the moment you become overtired, then your sleep's disrupted and other things start to get on top of you. And it's quite minor things can quite quickly build up. So making sure you look after yourself as best you can with sleep, with food, with exercise, and with a routine, I've found through the entire lockdown have been really, really important for me. And therefore not sweating the small stuff, or worrying about or expending any emotional energy on the things you can't control. And there are a lot of people I know who have perhaps over focused on the things they've been told they cannot do. and the stress you can hear in their voice as they're describing the frustration, the anger that these things have been taken from them, rather than saying, okay, I can't leave the house, or I can only go out once a day for exercise, as it was in the first bit of lockdown. But what can I do that I would not normally do? And for me, I'm normally an international traveler. A couple of years ago, I flew over 550,000 miles, doing various work bits and bobs around the world. And my carbon footprint is awful. But for me, being forced to not fly for almost an entire year was quite unusual for me, and it was a bit of an adjustment. But it meant that I was able to sleep better, or sleep longer, because I wasn't commuting, eat better, regularly take exercise that might quite be disrupted if I was traveling a lot. And I really noticed how much that affected my health in a really positive way. I'm an avid sort of viewer of statistics, as it were, on my Garmin watch when I run or cycle or whatever. And my resting heart rate came down between 10 and 15 beats a minute, just by doing quite simple things that I've always been chronically sleep deprived. I think, I can keep going. I'm very lucky that I've got the ability to still function at a fairly high level, even if I'm tired or in, uncertain situations. But actually seeing, real data show me that the moment I actually do start looking after myself, I can make better health decisions, as it were. And then the moment I start traveling again, I can see it creeping up. So I'm personally much more aware of my own body and what I need that I didn't think I needed until I was forced to actually change the way I was living.
That's really interesting, isn't it? That thing of, until in a way we're put in these extreme situations where you have no choice to adapt. And we often, I think it's really interesting when you talk about adventure as well. Often we think of the extreme bit as being in the place that we're really under stress. But yeah. I think, like you're saying, actually, it's often, if you're someone who is used to coping in really stressful situations, actually it's the opposite. It's actually when all of that is stripped away, how are you able to sort of sit and adjust to that, whether it's a sort of a void or the space, like you said, just to be able to notice actually were all of those things that were helpful to me necessarily, or, how do I cope and adjust when all of that is sort of stripped away too?
Yeah. And I think how we think about adventure is a much bigger thing than perhaps we generally think about. It doesn't have to be extreme. And I love extreme things. I love, I decided I'd try and learn some new stuff in lockdown. So I learned to free dive and learned to paramotor, which is basically running along with a parachute and a lawnmower on your back and, take off and fly about. Things that I would never normally have done, just because I thought I want to try and take out of lockdown something positive. But it doesn't have to be extreme. I now am far more appreciative of just a nice walk in a new place. That's a mini adventure, certainly for my dog. She loves the new sniffs and smells by going somewhere different, and just starting to appreciate the things that we perhaps took for granted. And I know as humans, we'll very quickly probably default back to just taking a lot for granted. But, I'd urge anybody, if you've done something different or new that works for you, try and hold on to that for as long as possible. And it doesn't have to be madly extreme, but just doing something can make a huge difference to your feeling of accomplishment, that you've done something, in a day or in a week or in a period that you wouldn't have done before. And that's really powerful.
Definitely. So, you alluded to it slightly at the beginning when you talked about you still had a half marathon to go for this as part of this adventure. But I'm also wondering sort of, what's next? It's very difficult to think, okay, how do you plan the next step from a hotel marathon in the way, I guess, when I speak to some of my guests, or I want to do this ultra race. But given the things that you've talked about in terms of the benefits and what you've learned as a result of what you've done here and more widely in lockdown, where would you like to take that? What are the next steps for you?
Well, another thing I did during lockdown while I was between main roles, employment-wise, was to write a book. So I've now signed with an agency literally last week, and they're excited to hopefully place the book somewhere. And that's talks a lot about trauma, overcoming adversity, and hopefully will be an inspirational kind of motivational piece that talks through some of the things that I've experienced. It's not a memoir per se. It's mainly written for my daughter, in all sort of honesty, because I haven't spent enough time with her over the years, because she lives in Australia and I live in the UK. And so it's really a book for her, fundamentally, that talks through some of those things that have been informative, instructive, scary, memorable, or whatever in my life, whether that's, as a child, some childhood trauma, work, leadership challenges, or good and the bad, really. So I've written that during lockdown. Hopefully that'll be out there at some point. If it's not, then it'll just stay as a sort of private book for her. But that's been quite interesting, and hopefully that will connect with more people, because the more I speak to folks, whether it's in business or through social media or through my network, it's amazing to me how what to you or I, from our experiences, might seem fairly normal, inverted commas, whatever normal is, can actually be the trigger for others to be wanting to try new things or realize that what they thought was a really challenging situation is actually something they can overcome or get through or do something different. And already just from my silly marathon in the hotel room, a friend has said that he's now going to swim 26.2 miles down the River Thames in a few weeks. And I've been effectively co-opted onto his support team, because I feel partly guilty for him, because, for him deciding to do it based on the back of my silly idea. So, if it helps, if any of the stuff that I do, whether I'm speaking, consulting, writing or anything else, if that helps people just frame their own challenges or inspires them to try their own adventure, just even a daily adventure, whatever it might be, then that feels good. And I enjoy that kind of aspect of being or engaging with the wider public.
So given that, and I guess everything that we've talked about, I mean, if someone's listening to this and they think, I mean, not necessarily that they want to run in a hotel room for 20 for 26 plus miles, but they're keen to try an adventure of their own or get started living more adventurously. I mean, what's the one piece of advice you'd give them?
Just do it. Don't wait for the ideal time to, and I'm guilty of this. I've said, in 6 months' time, it'll be right when I can plan this particular thing. The hotel marathon came about literally in a couple of sort of an hour of thinking, what could I do? And then chatted with RBLI, who I'm a supporter of and a founding patron of the Tommy Club of theirs. And they said, well, we would happily promote this, and, we could engage with all of our community. They love this kind of thing. And it sort of snowballed quite quickly. So I think if you've got an idea, whether it's something you just want to do personally, or it's something where you want to raise money for a cause that's important to you, then just, reach out to people, because, you don't have to be a celebrity to start something that's interesting that others will want to support. And, there's no reason why I should be on Sky News or Forces News or anything else talking about this stuff. But if you can find a way to connect and it helps the wider community, be amazed how quickly people show interest and how much money you can raise. And I had no idea in my wildest dreams that we'd be, over £7,600 and hopefully with a chance of raising 10,000 just from what started out as a sort of a silly idea sitting in Sydney watching TV. So yeah, just, there's plenty of information out there, more than there's ever been on the internet on, those kinds of things that you could plan for, whether it's an expedition or just something more local. But, reach out to people and you might find you can take some friends along with you, and it becomes a bit of a community adventure in itself. It doesn't have to be you on your own, but some of the individual ones can also be exciting too.
Ash, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and for speaking to me. If people want to find out more, they've been inspired for what they've heard and want to find out more about your hotel marathon or all the work you do, where can they go? On
social media, Instagram, Twitter and Facebook, you can find me at Ash Alex Cooper and ashalexcooper.com as well on the web. And if you want to donate to the second phase of this marathon challenge for RBLI, then please go to tinyurl.com/hotel marathon. That's tinyurl.com/hotel marathon. And let's smash £10,000. Every pound helps.
I'll pop all those links in the show notes as well, so everyone can access them really easily. That's been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for chatting to me.
That's
and for rounding off season 3, which I can't quite believe I'm saying. But yeah, and just wish you all the very best with smashing your target and with the book and everything. Can't wait to hear how it goes.
Thanks a lot, Nikki. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
No worries. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Wow, so that's it. Season 3 is done. Oh my goodness, I can't believe it. I don't quite know how we've got to 10 episodes and halfway through July, but all I can say, first of all, is thank you so much to my incredible guests who have joined me on this season. Each one of them has been inspiring in a different way, and I really feel that I've learned so much across this season of speaking to all my wonderful guests. So please do, if you haven't had a chance to catch up with all of them, I know it can be a bit of a rattle through when they're launched every week. So please do take the time over the summer to catch up with those episodes you've missed, because I think together they create a picture and a wider story about the diversity and the different aspects of adventure. And I think the thing that I want to pick up, just to sort of in a way summarize this season as well as this episode, is this idea that adventure is a process. It's not a goal. And I think that's important because I think so much of the time it is set up in, whether it is in the media, whether it's in terms of, how we think about accomplishing and achieving, that adventure is a goal to be achieved, and it's an item on a bucket list. It's ticking off something. And whilst that is absolutely part of it, and that achieving those things is incredible and adds so much to our resilience and confidence and knowing what we can achieve, I think it is about taking that a step further and seeing those goals as part of a process. And it's not a linear process where you start at point A and you get to point B, which is somewhere at the top of a mountain, and we've sort of self-actualized or realized becoming an adventurer, whatever that looks like. But it's about weaving those strands of adventure, that way of seeing the world, that way of living and embracing challenge and embracing opportunity, as a mindset, as a way of thinking, not just a way of being. And I think hopefully through the various conversations that I've had over this season, that is a thread to me that has been woven through, that often, even when achievements have been reached, that there's always something next. And that next may not look like something higher or bigger, but it is something that has been shaped by the previous experience. And that adventure is about creativity too. And I think that came through really clearly in my final conversation with Ash, that it's about taking the space that you are in and seeing the possibility and opportunity within that to not only help or support others, but also to find a way to navigate that supports our own health, our mental well-being, and our physical well-being as well. Sometimes it's not about the huge adventures. Sometimes it is about how we create the opportunity for it in the space that we're in. So I'm going to leave it there for the last time this season. Thank you so much for listening. Genuinely, I am always blown away by the wonderful comments and suggestions that I receive and the lovely messages that you send me. I also want to make a massive shout out to my wonderful editor, Fran, who has worked tirelessly to bring this to you, often at quite short notice, it has to be said. So huge thanks to Fran. So, as I said, this is not the end. This is just a pause, a break for over the summer. And we will be back in September with season 4. I have some incredible guests lined up for you. I genuinely cannot wait to share them with you. So please do tune in. The easiest way is to subscribe. You'll find out when it lands. But if you want to be kept in the loop, be reminded of previous episodes as well, and just, find out more around the whole philosophy around everyday adventure, please do reach out. You can find me on Instagram, Resilience at Work. You can find me on Facebook in the Everyday Adventure Club. I'm on LinkedIn, Nikki Bass, so get in touch with me via there. Or you can find my website, resiliencework.co.uk. And as always, I'd absolutely love to hear from you. And if you have enjoyed this season and previous episodes, please leave me a review. That would be absolutely amazing. But like I said, anyway, just knowing that you're listening and enjoying it, that's totally enough for me. Otherwise, have an incredible summer or winter if you happen to be in the Southern Hemisphere. Enjoy the break, and I will look forward to speaking to you again mid-September. Gosh, have a wonderful, wonderful break. Enjoy, and I look forward to catching up with you again really soon. Take care. Bye.